November 27th, 1942. Southern England. The sky above the English Channel was a jagged gray sheet of cloud, torn apart by wind and exhaust. A single Messerschmitt Bf 109 F4 cut through the turbulence, its propeller blurring into a silver disc. The pilot, Oberleutnant Rudolf Schmidt, 24 years old and newly decorated, believed he was returning home to his base in occupied France. He had been flying since dawn, a patrol mission gone wrong. After chasing a pair of RAF Spitfires too far across the channel, he'd lost radio contact, then sight of his formation. His fuel gauge trembled, near empty. The sea below was invisible beneath the fog. Somewhere ahead, he thought, was the French coast. Safety, fuel, and familiar voices on the radio. He tapped his compass, muttered to himself, west, southwest. That should be Le Touquet. He dropped altitude, scanning for a landing strip. Through the mist, a row of hangars emerged. Neat, well-maintained, with white-painted perimeter posts and a single windsock fluttering lazily in the wind. Relief flooded through him. Gott sei Dank, he breathed. I'm home. He lined up for approach, lowered his landing gear, and touched down smoothly on the wet tarmac. His wheels screeched, kicking up spray. The Bf 109 rolled to a stop. Then, silence. No ground crew rushed out. No mechanics waved him in. Instead, a handful of uniformed men stood frozen near the edge of the field, staring at him. Something was wrong. Before Schmidt could react, a Bren gun swung toward him from a sandbagged emplacement. One of the men shouted in English, sharp, commanding. Another fired a warning burst into the air. Schmidt's stomach dropped. The airfield, the windsock, the men. They weren't Germans. They were British. In disbelief, he raised his hands inside the cockpit as soldiers swarmed the aircraft. Within seconds, he was surrounded, dragged from the plane and pinned against the fuselage. His captor's eyes were wide, not with anger, but astonishment. One of them, a sergeant with an RAF insignia, turned to his commanding officer. Sir, it's a bloody Messerschmitt, and it's perfectly intact. Across the channel, the Luftwaffe had no idea what had just happened. Their most advanced frontline fighter, the pride of German aviation, had landed gently in enemy hands, its systems untouched, its engine still warm. Oberleutnant Schmidt had delivered Britain a gift greater than any spy could have stolen. Within hours, word reached RAF Intelligence Command. The aircraft was flown under heavy guard to Farnborough, the Allied testing center for captured enemy equipment. Engineers gathered in disbelief around the sleek, sand-yellow plane marked with the black Balkan Kreuz. They had fought and feared the Bf 109F for years, but never had they seen one up close. Now, for the first time, they could open its panels, study its heart, and understand its soul. What they found inside would soon rewrite how Allied pilots fought and how they survived. December 1942, Farnborough Air Technical Establishment, England. The hangar doors slid open with a metallic groan. A group of British and American engineers, some in oil-stained overalls, others in crisp uniforms, gathered around the sleek, sand-colored machine resting under floodlights. It was a Messerschmitt Bf 109 F4, the newest model in Germany's most feared fighter line. For years, Allied pilots had cursed its name. The Bf 109s had ruled the skies over France, dominated the Battle of Britain, and mauled bombers across Europe. Yet none had ever been captured intact. Until now. As the technicians swarmed the plane, every rivet and control surface was examined, drawn, and catalogued. RAF engineers from the Air Fighting Development Unit moved methodically. One checked the Daimler-Benz DB601E engine, another measured the curvature of the wings, while others tested the hydraulic systems. It was like dissecting a dragon, dangerous, beautiful, and vital to understand. Flight Lieutenant Eric Adams Winkle-Brown, one of the RAF's most skilled test pilots, walked slowly around the aircraft, his eyes tracing every contour. "She's clean," he murmured. "No wasted line. German engineering at its best." Then he added with a smirk, "But let's see if she's as invincible as they claim." The next day, under tight security, Brown climbed into the cockpit. He immediately noted how cramped it was, barely enough room to move. The control stick sat stiff between his knees, the visibility poor over the long nose. He flicked the magnetos and the engine coughed to life, a deep, throaty growl filling the hangar. As he taxied onto the runway, observers held their breath. Moments later, the Messerschmitt roared into the sky, not in German hands, but under British control. For the next hour, Brown put the aircraft through every maneuver he knew: dives, climbs, turns, stalls. The Bf-109 handled sharply, powerful, responsive, but also temperamental. The engine torque pulled heavily to one side on takeoff. The landing gear, narrow and fragile, made landings treacherous. When he returned, his face said it all. It's a killer, but only if the pilot's perfect. The engineers gathered around as he listed his observations. The Messerschmitt was superb in climb and acceleration. It could outturn most Allied planes at low speed. But its cockpit visibility and short endurance were weaknesses. And above all, its narrow landing gear made it unforgiving for inexperienced pilots. The report, classified as Technical Intelligence Debrief, Enemy Aircraft Type Bf-109F, was sent to both the RAF and the U.S. Army Air Forces. Its conclusions would soon shape how every Allied fighter pilot faced the Luftwaffe. The RAF learned to avoid turning duels, exploiting the Messerschmitt's blind spots instead. The Americans adjusted their P-47 Thunderbolt and P-51 Mustang tactics, using altitude and speed to dictate combat, not agility. What the Germans had seen as a perfect fighter, the Allies now understood as a machine with flaws, exploitable ones. At Farnborough, the engineers continued their study late into the night. They stripped panels, weighed components, analyzed fuel mixtures. One of them, a young American mechanic, tapped the fuselage thoughtfully and said, "You know, sir, this thing's not unbeatable. It's just human." That single mistake, one pilot's navigation error, had exposed the heart of the Luftwaffe's most trusted weapon. And back in Berlin, no one yet knew the damage that mistake was about to cause. Spring 1943. Across the skies of Europe, the war in the air was evolving fast. The once invincible Luftwaffe was beginning to meet an enemy that no longer played by its rules. From the coasts of France to the skies over Germany, Allied pilots were suddenly fighting smarter, striking faster, and surviving longer. And much of that shift traced back to a single aircraft sitting in a hangar at Farnborough, the captured Messerschmitt Bf-109F. The data gathered from its tests had been turned into a tactical handbook distributed quietly to fighter commands across the RAF and the U.S. 8th Air Force. It didn't read like a manual, it read like a warning. Quote, "The Bf-109F climbs rapidly but cannot sustain high-speed turns. Do not dogfight. Strike from above, then disengage. Its engine is powerful but overheats quickly under prolonged strain." Unquote. These simple truths changed everything. In the months that followed, Allied squadrons began flying differently. Spitfire's Mk-9s climbed higher, attacked in pairs, and refused to be drawn into turning duels. American Mustang and Thunderbolt pilots used their superior dive speed to ambush German formations, striking and vanishing before the Messerschmitts could respond. And the results were immediate and devastating. In the spring of 1943 alone, Luftwaffe losses over Western Europe tripled. For the first time, German aces who had once dominated the skies began to fall in equal measure. The Allies were no longer learning by dying. They were learning by understanding. Back at Farnborough, Flight Lieutenant Eric Brown and his team continued experimenting. They used the captured aircraft to simulate mock battles, pairing it against Spitfires, Hurricanes, and even early Mustangs. Every test confirmed the same pattern. The Bf-109 was deadly, yes, but also delicate. A single burst to its radiator and the engine failed. A steep dive and its controls stiffened dangerously. Armed with this knowledge, Allied engineers began designing upgrades: stronger radiators, improved control surfaces, higher altitude superchargers.
The Spitfire Mk9, introduced later that year, was tailored specifically to match and eventually surpass the Bf-109F. By mid-1943, the Hunter had become the Hunted. German pilots noticed the difference immediately. Quote, "The Tommies are climbing higher now. They know when to hit us and when not to." Unquote. It wasn't arrogance anymore, it was data. That single error, Schmidt's wrong landing in the fog of 1942, had handed the Allies a technical Rosetta Stone. They now knew exactly how the Luftwaffe's most advanced fighter thought, moved, and failed. And with that knowledge came confidence, the kind of quiet certainty that changes wars. By late 1943, as Allied bombers began pounding German industry and cities day after day, the Luftwaffe could no longer maintain control of the skies. For every Bf-109 that rose to intercept, 2 Allied fighters waited above, using the lessons first learned from the captured plane. Oberlieutenant Schmidt's mistake had become a legend within British intelligence, a story whispered in mess halls and briefing rooms. "One man's error gave us their wings," pilots would say before climbing into their cockpits. And in a way, it was true. The Allies now owned not just the air, but the knowledge of how to rule it.
Autumn 1944, somewhere near Stuttgart, Germany. Oberlieutenant Rudolf Schmidt sat in a prison camp mess hall, staring at a tin mug of tea gone cold. Around him, the muffled drone of Allied bombers echoed above the clouds, the same sound that had haunted Germany night after night. He didn't know that the mistake he'd made more than 2 years earlier had helped create that sound, that the unbroken rhythm of those bombers was in part a consequence of his wrong landing on that fog-shrouded English airfield. To Schmidt, it had been a navigational error, a sudden cloud bank, a compass glitch, a moment of disorientation after hours of flight. He had thought he was landing at a Luftwaffe base in northern France. Instead, his wheels had touched down on a British runway, surrounded instantly with men with rifles. For months he was interrogated, questioned about his unit, his aircraft, his training. He gave little, but the Allies already had everything they needed. His Bf-109F had done the talking for him. By late 1944, that plane had changed the way the Allies fought. Its secrets had helped perfect the Spitfire Mk9, inspired the P-51 Mustang's superior aerodynamics, and guided countless pilots in how to outfight Germany's once feared Luftwaffe. Schmidt heard the difference in the sky. He recognized the deeper roar of Allied engines, the distinct harmony of power and precision. And deep down, though no one told him, he suspected. He had heard rumors from other prisoners of a captured 109 being tested in England, of British engineers who learned its every move. Each time, Schmidt felt a hollow weight in his chest. If it was true, his mistake had become something far larger than himself, a silent traitor to his own side. Outside the wire, the war was collapsing. Allied fighter-bombers ruled the air, strafing trains, bridges, convoys. The Luftwaffe, once Europe's terror, was now bleeding to death. Even Germany's latest jets, the MiG-262s, came too late, too few, and too fuel-starved to turn the tide. And in a quiet corner of England, the captured 109F still stood, retired now, polished, preserved, its skin patched and silvered with age. To the engineers and pilots who had studied it, it was more than a trophy. It was a turning point, a moment when knowledge triumphed over fear. When Allied airmen looked at that aircraft, they didn't just see German craftsmanship. They saw how understanding the enemy could be the most powerful weapon of all. The war would end within a year. Cities would burn, nations would fall, and men like Schmidt would return home to ruins. But the lesson of his flight and his error would endure for decades. In hangars and textbooks, in fighter tactics and engineering design, that one captured plane became a symbol of how wars are often won not only by courage, but by comprehension. And for every Allied pilot who soared through the clouds of Europe in 1944, striking with confidence and precision, there was an invisible echo of that foggy morning in 1942, the day a wearied German pilot descended through the mist and gave his enemies the wings they needed to win.